In this video, we're going to take a look at some data that was shot using this configuration here that includes a Canon 60DA DSLR camera and the William Optics Zenith Star 73 APO. There's also a Skytech CLS CCD filter in there, which is a great filter for the type of target that I shot with this configuration, which is the Cocoon Nebula. So what I'd like to do with this video is for you to actually download this data and walk through the tutorial with me and see where you end up, or just take it in a completely new direction altogether. If we all download the same data and process it in different directions, we can then kind of review the pictures and kind of notice the direction that others took. So there's a link in the description to download this data captured with this setup, the Cocoon Nebula. If you don't want to process that, there's also the Lagoon Nebula and the Sol Nebula captured with some other setups. The main thing though is after you process these photos, please share them with the hashtag your astrophoto skills. That way I'll be able to find them all and kind of collect them all and put them on either on social media or on the website. There's kind of a wall of fame section on the Your Astrophoto Skills page. I'll highlight some of my favorite processed images from this project. So have fun with it, process the images. Hopefully you follow along with the Cocoon Nebula that we're gonna hop into Photoshop and work on now. Just the bottom line is share with that hashtag your astrophoto skills. That way I'll be able to find it, we can pull them all together and look at them as a group. So without further ado, we'll hop into Photoshop for the tutorial. I'm looking at the data that was collected using a Canon 60DA DSLR. I'm so excited about this camera. It's an astrophotography camera from Canon, and I was able to find one used with a shutter count of 3,000 actuations on it, which is nothing. So it's basically brand new. An unbelievable find. So thanks to Skywatcher for hooking me up with that. And I was able to use it last night for the first time, and I'm just reviewing the data that I shot, and I figured why not record it and kind of go over the stacking and the processing of this image with you guys so we can kind of explore it together. We're just looking at the individual exposures taken here last night using the Canon 60DA. These are the calibration frames. So let's get to the lights over here. So they were 4 minutes each at ISO 800, and the target, and you probably can't see it in there, I'm almost positive that you can't, it's the Cocoon Nebula. So if you look closely, you should see this kind of dark area that's some dark dust that's blocking out starlight, and the cocoon's kind of over here. So this gives you an idea of the field of view using a crop sensor DSLR camera with a telescope like the William Optics Zenith Star 73, the Z73. Here's a look at it at my setup last night. I took some pictures this morning before tearing down. So here's the Z73 on the EQ6R Pro. There's the Canon 60DA at the back there with the dedicated field flattener for this telescope. There it is there attached. That's around where I found focus with this camera. And the filter in there was the Skytech CLS CCD. So if you remember me using that filter a while ago for DSLR astrophotography, it's a great choice for a lot of deep sky targets using a DSLR. So that's the filter of choice there because this is a modified DSLR, the Canon 60DA. So let's get back to the image frames here. As I said, I got the calibration frames, which is darks, bias, and flats. So these are the bias files. As you can see, they're 1/8000th of a second at ISO 800. And then the darks are, of course, 240 seconds long at ISO 800, the same temperature as the lights. And then the flats using the white t-shirt method that I took this morning. So let's get into Deep Sky Stacker and actually stack all this together. So I'll just navigate to the folder where I stored everything. I like to record the image, the target, the date, and the filter used. That can be hard to determine after the fact, so it's important to record that. Oh, just before I get into here, because all of these light frames look very similar at a glance, but I'll tell you what happened. If you're looking at these light frames here, and we get to a certain point, you'll see that the field has jumped. So if this is the dark dust in the Cocoon Nebula here, and we go up to this frame, it's now up here. So I'm not going to stack these last few frames, which is unfortunate. 5 more 4-minute subs I can't use. and that's simply because there was some passing clouds that came by, and of course PHD2 guiding went haywire, lost the star, trying to regain its traction, and then when it did finally come back, and this is all happening outside in the background while I was sound asleep. When it did finally get back, it had moved the frame trying to find the star quite substantially. So if I stack these frames in there together, there's going to be some serious overlappage there, and I'll end up losing a lot of the top portion of my frame here, and I want to keep it well centered. So I'm going to leave these out, which unfortunately means I'm not going to be stacking too many frames. I believe I got 20 useful light frames to stack. So let's just make note of that. That's number light frame 0039. So I'm going to stack from the first light frame to 39. So that's 20 to 39. Let me just confirm that. Yeah. And I did go through here and I deleted the few frames that were either a passing cloud or weren't the full exposure, anything like that. So we're just looking at pretty well everything that we're going to stack. So from 20 to 39, those are my light frames I want to stack here. And that's just, of course, in the open light frames in Deep Sky Stacker. So let's check those. Yeah, so 20 light frames. It's good to look, confirm the exposure length in here in that column, the ISO, or ISO, I got to start calling it ISO, it's not ISO. And it actually shows the temperature here too, which is useful. So 18, we've got looks like from 16 to 18 degrees. Quite warm, but I mean, this is an uncooled DSLR, and it was a spring night. It was cool, but yeah, that's still pretty warm, and we're definitely going to see the noise from that. So this is just looking at what the frames kind of look like in Deep Sky Stacker here. But let's load our darks in. So the dark frames are, of course, the same temperature and exposure length as the lights. How many did I take? I thought I took more than that. Oh, that's right. I cut it short. I got impatient. I think I only took 10. 9. So I took 9 dark frames. That should be enough to average out that dark signal. Flat frames are a lot quicker and easier. Well, quicker. So I believe I took 20 of those. We're going to load them all in. 23 flat frames. How did that happen? Let's just make sure. Looks like we've got a few that are a slightly different exposure length. I'm just going to remove those. I use the aperture priority mode on the DSLR to take these flat frames with a white t-shirt. So it chooses the correct exposure. And in case it's of importance to you, I use 2 layers of t-shirts to create these flats, which results in a little bit longer of an exposure to create this flat frame to even out the field illumination. Last but not least, our bias frames. On the Cocoon. Let's see how many I got. Those 20 bias frames. So all of these images were, this whole sequence of exposures was set in Astrophotography Tool, APT. It's a great software for image capture, whether you're using a DSLR camera or a dedicated astronomy camera. So it's kind of nice that way. And if you're used to the more simplified software for DSLR control like Backyard EOS, I think you'll enjoy APT. It's a very similar experience and very straightforward. Okay, so everything looks good. I'm just looking in my exposure category to make sure nothing went haywire there. And we can actually check all. And I'm going to go to Register Checked Pictures. Now before I go in and just start stacking this, I want to look at some of the recommended settings and the stacking parameters. So a few things to note here. I am going to use the bilinear debayering. That was a suggested feature to use from Deep Sky Stacker. I am going to use that. If you're using a modded DSLR, reset all white balance settings. That was pre-checked. Super pixel mode I won't be checking because this is not a narrowband image. I have found that is useful to use when stacking narrowband images. Sigma clipping combination method is great for averaging out the noise, stacking, and also getting rid of satellite trails or anything that might have snuck in your frames there. And then I'm going to use the Sigma clipping median combination method for the bias frames and for the dark frames. This one is the so median combination method. So there's a few options to consider here, and if they sound confusing, some of these methods, they're basically just the way that Deep Sky Stacker handles averaging out noise and the rejection and what it considers to remove a bad pixel and whatnot. A lot of them produce strikingly similar results. It's best to test them. These are the ones I'm using in this case, and so it should give you a good idea of what you can expect. So I've got that lovely green notification here because I'm using all of the calibration frames, all of the recommended calibration frames from Deep Sky Stacker. And then in the stacking parameters, pretty well default here. I'm going to turn off enable 2x drizzle. This was set from the last time I stacked an image using my dedicated astronomy camera with binning 2x2, so a smaller resolution, and the drizzle doubles it in size and actually can create a crisper image in theory when you scale it back down in post-processing. There's a lot to drizzle. That's a bad explanation of it, but if I used it for this DSLR image with that 5,000 pixel width, it would crash my computer. It's too much for it and too massive of an image. It might not crash, but I wouldn't have enough RAM to open it in Photoshop. So everything in here, I believe, is set the factory default settings for DSS. So Kappa Sigma clipping is a big one for the stacking mode. You can try median and average, but I'm going to use Kappa Sigma clipping. That's just the algorithm, and then standard mode here. So that's just a brief coverage of what's going on in there. And then I always click off register already registered pictures. I haven't registered any of these pictures yet. Registering is just aligning them on top of each other. It's basically the aligning. And now the star detection threshold slider, you may want to play with this because it could save you a lot of time. So as you can see, I just ran that on the image here to calculate the number of stars at 30%, 451 stars. That's actually a good value. It's a nice balance between having enough stars to register the images and for it not to take ages to actually stack the image. I'm going to leave it at that, but just for argument's sake, if we put that down to 10%, you're going to see a lot more stars that it's detected, and it would take a long time to stack this image because it's going through and saying, okay, how many stars do we need before we can confidently align these images? So look at 1,427 stars. There's no need for that. It can align just fine using a lot less stars than that. Even 100 stars is fine. So why don't we, just to save time, set it to 35%. So 365 stars, I'm going to say okay. And in this lovely screen here, we kind of get a recap of what's going on. The most important part is probably the total exposure time. And so 1 hour and 20 minutes. Story of my life, not enough exposure time on this target, but it wasn't a great night. There were gaps in the clouds, so I'm happy to test out the 60 DA on the Cocoon Nebula, which I haven't shot in a while, and get over 1 hour on it. So I'm going to say okay, and we're going to stack that, and then when I see you next, we're going to be in Adobe Photoshop. So at this point, maybe it's useful to tell you what my sky conditions are like. If you don't know already, it's a Bortle Class 6. So pretty heavily light polluted, but you know what, could be worse, and I remember worse, and this is better. So again, I'll kind of zip through this because I don't want to spend too much time, but essentially we're going to balance the neutralize the background sky right now, and the best way to do that is to use a threshold adjustment layer. If you've seen my videos, you've probably seen me do this before. And using this slider, I can kind of see where the bright spots and the dark spots of the image are. So to set the black point, I think I'm going to choose this spot over here that I can be pretty confident that that's just a dark area of the night sky, as opposed to choosing an area where I know it's that dust lane as a part of the target. I don't want to balance in there because it might be kind of brown, so I want to choose the background sky. So I've set one point over there, and did I set it? Yes, there it is there. And I'll set another one kind of in a different spot to just kind of get to balance things out. So I've plotted 2 points for the black point, and now I want to set my white point. So we'll slide down the other way and just see what pops out first as the brightest points in the image. Ideally, you're using a G2V star that's the same as our sun to get the as best a natural white balance as possible, but this one looks pretty bright to me. So if I turn that layer off, let's just get that right in the center. You know what? When I look at it, I feel like I can see that it's a warmer looking star as opposed to a cool one. Nonetheless, I'm going to choose that one as my, hopefully it's the same star type as our sun to get a natural white balance. So I've plotted those points. I can get rid of this threshold adjustment layer, and now I can go into the actual color balancing. So I'll create a new visual merge layer on top. I'll use a keyboard shortcut for that. Shift Control Alt N plus E. So I've got this new layer that we're going to make the adjustments in case I have to go back later. So that involves going into the levels. I'm loving what the histogram looks like right now. And before we do that, let's make sure our info palette is up. So we're going to be paying attention to these values here to neutralize the background sky. So for red, I'm going to bring that shadow in on the shadow side down to, why don't we just keep it safe for now and bring that down to about 29 on this one, 31 on the other. Green. So we're basically balancing the background sky color. We're neutralizing the background each channel at a time to balance it out. So the goal is to get them all at the same value. And because that blue is sitting at 20 and 23 respectively, I'm actually going to match that with the other channels. As we do a curve stretch shortly, those values are going to increase, obviously, because we're brightening up the image overall. But it's a good starting point to get a balance. Look at that, 23, 23, 23 for our point number 2. So that's that area of sky. And then the white balance, it looks like we're pretty even, although the red needs to be picked up a little bit to match that 254. And that's just on the highlight side of the histogram here. Again, I'm selecting the channels and making these individual adjustments. And look at that. If you've seen this target before, the Cocoon Nebula, that's the color it should be. So the white balance and the neutralizing the background sky, we've done a pretty decent job there. So the before and after is pretty substantial there. So at this stage, I'm super happy with the data I'm looking at. Just over an hour in the city on the Cocoon Nebula. So we've adjusted set the black point and the white point, or the white balance of the image. So I'll save that just as a layer on top of the original, create another layer on top of there, and I'm going to stretch it a little further using curves. So sometimes it's helpful to hold down the control key, select the area you want to boost up, so the nebulosity in the cocoon, and then holding down control again, clicking on a dark area of sky, and it plots these 2 points. So when you do pull it, you're just pulling at ideally you're pulling at the portions of the image that you want to boost and leaving alone the ones you aren't. But it can get a little out of hand if you do this too aggressively and a little unnatural. So that's kind of, as you can see, it's kind of an S curve there. Rather than that, I'm going to do just more sort of a traditional curve right in the middle, kind of pulling at things evenly. As we do that, we've brought up the black point again, so we can kind of, because we have those points plotted, we can kind of look at where those are again. And so we're up to the high 30s now. So again, you can go in, kind of bring those in. Because they're balanced, we can kind of bring it in universally now. So there we go, we're kind of bringing that background sky in, back in a little bit. And if you haven't noticed already, these stars in general have kind of a red cast to them. And that is, I can definitely tell you, because of the filter I'm using. So, that comes at a price to cut out a lot of those man-made artificial light sources like street lamps and car headlights and all that. To actually filter those out, you're affecting the natural color of these stars, which really takes away some of those beautiful cool colors like the blues and stuff. So, but that can all be brought back. So rather than really poking at this image and pulling it out, why don't I do some more of the basic moves that are, you know, pretty powerful processing steps, and in the order that I do them in. So the next one we're going to call noise reduction. I'm just naming my layers here. And the noise reduction tool I like to use is in the camera raw filter in the newest version of Adobe Photoshop CC. So it's in the detail tab, and there's a slider here for luminance. So that's the noise reduction slider that you want to play with here. So if you look at the image up close, you can see a lot of noise, but as I pull this slider across, it's decreasing, although it is softening up the image overall as well. You may want to adjust this the color slider too, because you can see some of that green color modeling in there. But again, as you adjust that color slider up, you're also potentially losing colors in your object as well. I'm pretty happy with this setting here. It's very subtle. You can also sharpen at this point and play with the masking in between that to balance out the sharpening and the noise. But I'm just going to do some noise reduction for now. Speaking of color, I'm just going to do a little bit of a color boost here, very selectively. So if I go into the select and color range menu here, with the selection of sampled colors, I can actually pick the beautiful pink of the Cocoon Nebula and then make this basic selection. And then using my favorite tool, which I talked about a few weeks ago, the select and mask, I can refine the selection in here in a very powerful way. So I like to feather the edges because I don't want that hard edge between my selection and where I haven't. And to be honest, I really don't care about these stars, and I really don't want to boost the color in those because it's just going to blow out those reds. But I have made the selection that I do want in my Cocoon Nebula, so bear with me here. So with that selection made, I'll do a new adjustment layer, and I'm going to go to Vibrance, which also has a saturation increase. So if I really crank that, it's not what you want, but to boost it up just slightly can have a nice effect. So I've boosted the color, it's just more dramatic red. I might turn that down a little bit in the opacity. And because I also selected those stars, and I definitely don't want to increase the saturation of those red stars, I'm just going to use the manual lasso tool here and set the feather to a really soft edge. Select my target, select inverse, which is basically selecting everything but my target, and delete that on this layer. So if I turn it off and on, very subtle, but I've boosted the color of my deep sky object that I wanted to boost. Another layer on top here. And so these stars, as I said, they all have kind of a red tinge, and one of the ways you can deal with that is again in the Camera Raw Filter tab. There's this lens correction tab, and this can be useful for correcting stars. So let's change the purple hue to include some of these red-orange colors. And then I'm going to bump the slider up the purple amount defringe slider. And as you can see, look at it, just cools them off and actually takes the color right out of them. So you don't want to do that, but because I do want some of those yellow stars, but I do want to just de-redify, if you will, these stars that are actually white. So I think about this amount is much better than where we were before, and it's not creating any strange artifacts when I do that. The image looks a little warm overall, so I'm actually going to adjust the white balance temperature while I'm in here in Adobe Camera Raw as well, very subtly. So quite a difference to the color balance, and especially those red stars in that effect there. Only a few more steps to go, and then we're going to wrap this up. So another layer on top. This one seems to make the biggest difference overall when you actually reduce the size of the stars in your image. Not for everybody, but I'm certainly a fan of small stars. So in the highlights, I've selected the stars in, that's the select color range, highlights. I want to select a few more stars, so I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to get the range, so we're adjusting that slider to make our selection. And then I'm going to expand that just to get around the stars completely. And then feather that by 1 just to kind of soften the edge. I got to be careful here because the action I'm about to run to reduce these stars could start to eat away into my subject as well. Although it doesn't appear to be, I don't think it's going to affect it too bad. But what I am going to do is use the lasso tool, like freehand, holding down Alt and removing these small stars here. I got to control that feathered edge there. Because these, I don't want to shrink these down. They don't need to be minimized very much. And it's going to start eating into potentially into the nebulosity. So I've got the rest of the stars selected here, and then it's just a matter of the incredibly powerful filter, other, minimum. And I'm going to say OK. And then with the selection tool, I always forget to say this, you just deselect your selection. So if we turn that off and on, it's quite a powerful difference between star minimizing and not. The next 2 steps I'm going to make on this image, I'm just going to run them quickly, are actions from the Astronomy Tools action set. And this one can take a bit of time, and it's the Enhance DSO and Reduce Stars. So I'm going to take a quick break, run that, and then I'll show you the after. Are you ready for this, the before and after, running the Reduce Stars and Enhance DSO? Boom. Look at that action. So, a big part of it obviously is the star minimizer. So if you're not a fan of the small stars, then you might not like this action, but I love it. What a powerful action. So again, that's the Carbonis Tools, Astronomy Tools action set. I highly recommend it. It usually puts kind of more of a purpley red cast. It depends on your filter and your camera, of course, but after I run it, you can see we've kind of lost our original white balance. So I'm just going to try and bring that back at least quickly for demonstration purposes, because this video is getting long, way longer than I planned. So I'm just going to use this set gray point, and I am going to select it in the dark dust area here. So I might play with this image a little more before I actually share the kind of the reveal at the end. But I am so happy with the images that I'm capturing with this Canon 60DA. Unfortunately, it's not a camera you can get easily anymore, but I'm thrilled. I can honestly say this is better than I expected to see. So a very cool target, the Cocoon Nebula, and you saw there some of the most powerful and basic techniques I use in Photoshop to process my images. So yeah, this is 1 hour and 20 minutes from the city using the Skytex CLS CCD filter, the Canon 60DA, through the William Optics Z73 Apo refractor. And this is an incredible telescope. So, I mean, that had a lot to do with it as well. But yeah, so if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, I've got, I'll be sharing more information about the Canon 60DA. I've got a lot of tutorials out there. I've reviewed the Zenith Star 73 telescope. It's excellent. So yeah, I hope this was useful for you. I'm gonna have to structure this better. This has gone on way too long, and I've kind of sped through some parts and spent too long on others. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, clear skies.